In the first part of the Bible, there are a series of holy days. In Hebrew, that word means a special appointed time. These are special appointed times. And there are many of them. But particularly, there are 3 in the springtime and 3 in the autumn time. Now, when you look at the holidays in the springtime, it seems kind of unusual that all of the events of the first coming of Yeshua took place on the exact dates of those spring holy days. Jesus was crucified on Passover. He was raised at the first Omer, and the Holy Spirit was poured out on Shavuot. It seems like it's more than a coincidence that the main events in the Gospels of the first coming of Yeshua took place on the spring holy days written in the Torah. And now that should make sense because, as I said, the spring and the fall holidays are called Mo'adim, which means appointed times. It means like you're making a meeting. Those holy days are appointed times for the people of God to meet with God and something to happen. So on the first holiday, which was Pesach or Passover, Yeshua was crucified. The second one was the first wave offering, or the Omer. Yeshua rose from the dead. And then on Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks, or Shavuot in Hebrew, the Holy Spirit was poured out. Now, it strikes me, what do you think? If the main events of the first coming happen on the spring holidays, it seems to me likely that the main events of the second coming will take place on the fall holidays. Now, I'm not prophesying at that. Maybe it won't happen, but the biblical pattern is clear. And so we would ask ourselves, is there meaning in the 3 fall holidays of the main events of the second coming? Those 3 holidays are the Feast of Trumpets, and then the Day of Atonement, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, as we look to the end times, those events that you have are the tribulation, the second coming, and the millennial kingdom. Those 3 things. Could they be connected with those 3 holidays? I personally think so, yes. That the Feast of Trumpets speaks of the tribulation time. The Day of Atonement, which is the great and terrible day of the Lord, speaks of the second coming. And the Feast of Tabernacles speaks of the millennial kingdom after Yeshua comes back. Now that would seem to make obvious sense just on the surface of it. But let's look for just 3 or 4 minutes a little deeper. The Feast of Trumpets. In the Torah of Moses, it says just to blow the trumpet. It doesn't really say why. Is there any place in the New Testament where we hear about blowing of trumpets that has to do with the end times? Sure. In the book of Revelation, there are 7 trumpets, which represent the 7 years of the tribulation period, which it would seem to be, without any great prophecy or revelation, that would represent what the Day of Trumpets is. The Day of Trumpet is blowing the trumpet for the fulfillment of the 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation. So what I am proposing, as I see it, is that the blowing of the trumpet in the law of Moses finds its meaning in the trumpets of tribulation in the book of Revelation. Should be obvious. And the second holiday is the Day of Atonement, which of course also has meaning that Yeshua gave his blood to give us atonement of sins. But the Day of Atonement is also the greatest day of the Hebrew calendar. In the later prophets, the Hebrew prophets, there's a day called the Great and Terrible Day of the Lord. That has to do with the second coming of Yeshua. And there has to be a day sometime. That's the greatest day in history, is the second coming of Yeshua. And it's the greatest day of the feast calendars. And on the Day of Atonement is not just individual atonement, which happened on Passover, but atonement for all the nations, which happens, and judgment at the second coming. It's interesting that in Jewish tradition, which you might not hear in Christian tradition, that the Day of Atonement represents a day of judgment for all peoples. And in modern Israeli history, the Day of Atonement means an attack of the nations, a disastrous attack of the nations against Israel, like it happened in 1973. So we believe that may be the time, or at least symbolizes the time of the nations attacking Israel and the coming of Yeshua. And the last of those three holidays is Tabernacles, which would seem to point toward the millennium, which is clearly prophesied in the book of Zechariah, when he said, on the Feast of Tabernacles, after the second coming, the nations will come up to Jerusalem, and there will be peace on earth. So what we're saying is, you can look at these holidays to give us a sense of foreshadowing, symbols of what will happen in the end times. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me. Both the fall holidays and the spring holidays point to the crucifixion of Yeshua and to the second coming. They have meaning on many different levels. I'm just saying, because when he came the first time, these specific events were fulfilled on the spring holidays, it's likely that the second coming will happen on the fall holidays. Now, one last point about the holidays. The spring holidays also point to that. One of the greatest symbols of the end times is the story of the Passover, the whole story of the Exodus. I mean, this is the last minute. I want you to concentrate. It's a very important thing. In Jewish tradition, they say that the last redemption will be like the first redemption. What does that mean? It means the coming of the Messiah in glory will be like the time that Moses took the children out of Israel. A friend of mine, out of Egypt, sorry. A friend of mine, Dan Juster, wrote a book called Revelation, the Passover Key. He said you can understand the book of Revelation by looking at the story of the Passover. Pharaoh is a type of Antichrist. The plagues that happen on Egypt are like the plagues of the end times. The children of Israel were inside of Egypt during the tribulation. That's one of the reasons why we know we will be here. But they were supernaturally protected during the time. So you will live, all of your congregations will be a little Goshen land. So God will protect you in the place where you meet. And then they come out, and then the forces of Pharaoh, of the Antichrist, attack them, and then the forces are all destroyed in a moment. And all that is symbols of the second coming of Yeshua. So all I'm saying is this. The holidays that are written, the appointed times that are written in the first part of the Bible, were pre-planned by God. And they have symbolic meaning. All of the symbolic meaning of all the holidays point to Yeshua. Half of the meaning is for the first coming. Half of the meaning is for the second coming. So it doesn't mean that Christians all around the world have to necessarily keep the Feast of Israel. It does mean that as you study the Bible, you should meditate on the fact that there is symbolic meaning in all of the feasts, pointing to both the first coming of Yeshua and his second coming.